for everybody out there listening, Tim and I met in a volunteer community service group called Los Coast Rotaract. And when I first met Tim, I realized he was very intellectual, very smart, and willing to give back to the community in Humboldt County, volunteering at events or donating for events. He came to multiple fundraisers that Rotary groups put on, and he's just overall a great guy. And then he bought the Arcata Theater Lounge, and that was a pretty amazing thing. Took over ownership, I think, in 2019, and you guys have been putting on shows. And Arcata Theater Lounge, for anybody who doesn't know, puts on all sorts of different events, fundraisers, ocean nights, drag nights, EDM shows, reggae shows. I mean, the list goes on. And I actually had my Arcata High, senior prom there. And there was a bartender, had mocktails. So it's overall a great venue. It's been there for decades. But I kind of want to just ask first, what is it like owning the Arcata Theater Lounge, and maybe the differences that happened once COVID started?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to that question would have been a lot more different a month after ownership,
Mm-hmm.
and then a year after, and then, especially once COVID started, those things changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's been really eye-opening, and we've been kind of lucky to be able to deal with certain problems that we didn't even know we really had until COVID started. Sometimes you get complacent with what you're doing currently, be that a work process or certain employees you might have that just aren't really right for the job, but because you already have them hired,
Mm-hmm.
they're just there. So with COVID, we laid off everyone, and it just changes your way of thinking about things, because then you have to go out and rehire everyone and set everything back up once things open up. And I think it'll make for a lot better operations. We were open from September to October of last year, and things worked really, really well because we had just a skeleton crew. It was just the people that we really wanted back were offered a job back, and things were extremely efficient. And it's obviously working within certain constraints. We only had 100 people inside the venue compared to 600. So when you scale like that, there's a lot of issues that arise that we might not have, but just kind of being eased into it makes me think initially when I took over, that's how I should have done it. I should have had a clean slate and just started fresh instead of trying to just pick up what had been done previously, because it was obviously not working great.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the lesson I've taken away so far. And with COVID, the only thing that really hurts is the ping ponging back and forth between different tiers. Obviously, we I have a mortgage payment I need to make, but our lenders have been gracious enough to work with us on deferring and forgiving some payments. But the worst is when we go from purple into red, and then we're allowed to open up, and they go back to purple. We spend between $10,000 and $30,000 every time to run up the business and shut it back down. Inventory, especially perishable inventory like food, that then when we're shut down just goes to waste. We've done our best to donate, and I've taken home stuff I can use personally, but things like training employees, hours of training that are just gone, and there's no way of getting that back in any significant way. So that's a really painful part, and it's really frustrating to be dealing with people who don't really know what they're doing, not because they're not trying, but just because it's such a new space. It's been 100 years since we had our last big pandemic in the world. No one's really alive that had that experience. So I think everyone's frustrated about that. But yeah, it's definitely something that's extremely difficult to deal with. Also on like an emotional and personal level for our employees, and for myself too, to just will they, won't they, type of stuff. So yeah, that I would say was the worst so far.
I know it's been painful for everybody out there, and for your employees, I'm sure you can see just the mental state of them wanting to work, and then them having to go on unemployment and then bounce back, and then all of a sudden it's purple. Like, do they go back on unemployment? And it's
Right.
this corona fatigue is very intense. Have you seen emotional status get? get
Yeah,
low?
I mean, I think I've seen a very, I mean, there will be many books written about this and studies about just the way that humans, reacted. I think at the beginning it was nice, you had people who were able to go on unemployment, they were able to take some time off, uh, but now it's, yeah, that corona fatigue is getting very long in the tooth. And I think just people, most humans are not made to you know operate in this environment. And when you have an employee, when we start paying them money, um, and maybe our hours aren't great right off the bat because we're still getting back into it, and then their unemployment money drops more than what we pay them, or
Mm-hmm.
gets wiped out completely. And that might be just a clerical or administrative thing in certain situations, but then they're on hold with these people for 8 to 10 hours over the course of a week trying to get through to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back in terms of employee morale. And I mean, Monica could talk more about this maybe when you have her on one day. She can maybe talk about that directly, but I just know
Mm-hmm.
it's secondhand and overhearing these conversations from
Mm-hmm.
our bartenders and stuff like that, where they're juggling all these different things. And it also makes it difficult for small businesses because just bringing employees back, our first round, when we were open last year, it was difficult to even get employees back because they just wanted to stay on unemployment, even though
Mm-hmm.
technically that's not, if you're on unemployment, you have to be looking for a job if one is offered to you, um,
Mm-hmm.
or at least you have to be making an effort. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people just said no, and we're more comfortable on the unemployment just with the amount of money paid, and the additional federal stimulus that was
Mm-hmm.
being offered. So it's kind of bad on all sides, but I guess that's just the nature of the situation.
Yeah, and something I've seen in the news recently in our local area is that the possible continuing in red tier, or maybe getting even better than red. And my roommate is part of um, a band, and he's been talking about possible gigs opening up soon. Is there any light at the tunnel this month for the ATL of something opening up?
We're hoping by April 1st, I believe there's a pretty big, just I don't know where this is coming from, but the state of California, that outside gatherings will be completely permitted, obviously with still with some guidelines, but basically you can have a concert outside. And I forget what the other thing was, but there was other types of events. Concerts has been something that outside or inside has not really been allowed to a large scale. So
Mm-hmm.
that's happening April 1st. From my understanding, not contingent on any tiers or any numbers, and
Mm-hmm.
statewide. So if that happens, then I'm optimistic that we can piggyback off of that. Not necessarily doing something outside. I'm not sure if the weather will be nice enough yet up here
Mm-hmm.
in Humboldt County. But Monica's been exploring some other options in terms of doing outside shows.
Mm-hmm.
But then just doing something inside. We had a really amazing last year when we were open. We were able to do, technically they weren't shows, but we were able to do entertainment events here
Mm-hmm.
that had 100 people,
Awesome.
100 tickets sold. Usually there would be throughout the night only about 80 people in the venue. Some people come early, some people
Mm-hmm.
leave late. And that puts us at maybe like 15% capacity, gives everyone more than enough space
Mm-hmm.
to mingle around, and keep their distance. So that's what I'm thinking will happen
Mm-hmm.
next. But again, here with the regulations, this is all something that's been happening very quickly. And there's, for example, a band playing an instrument on stage is considered live entertainment, but
Mm.
playing a DJ set on stage is not considered live entertainment. So
Interesting.
it's you're kind of discriminating. What they're saying is, if you're playing an instrument, you move around more, and you also singing or chanting or speaking is also not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we did have a private event where we had these plexiglass panels that went around the stage, that kind of mitigated that.
Yeah.
But that was private, so that wasn't open to the public. But yeah, to give you a big non-answer, I would say
Mm-hmm.
April 1st is kind of the next date that we should be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm optimistic we'll go down to orange tier
Mm.
before then.
Nice. I really hope so. I know there's a lot of people that are wanting to get out and do things. The last few farmers markets in Arcata have been, more and more people.
Yep.
So that's been really cool, just to see other human faces. A lot of us have just been indoors, and I'm sure you can relate to that too. Just
Especially through the winter. Yeah. I mean,
mm-hmm.
that's Humboldt County winters are not always the nicest, at least in
Yeah,
terms
no,
of
we've
temperature.
been getting a little rain recently, which is good, but
No,
also
I love the rain. I grew up here, and
mhm,
I love the rain more than anything. But I know
mhm.
most people don't.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It keeps us indoors. We're already
Yeah,
indoors so
exactly,
much.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I saw also the vaccination numbers look pretty promising. I mean, I think 30,000 people. Let me look it up here. I think 30,000 people have been vaccinated. Yeah, 35,000 doses have been administered
In
in
Humboldt
Humboldt
County,
County. Yeah, which is, I mean,
which
we're
is
only
a
a county
quarter,
of,
right? Aren't we like
yeah, we're,
100,000?
uh, yeah, I think just over 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, and that's been only a few weeks that we've been vaccinating people so far. So
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, I really am optimistic too, and just that the vaccines will start working, and we won't see any
Yeah,
more, surges, and just lower the
exactly.
tiers. Not from going red to purple and back and forth is just
Yeah.
exhausting and the mental status of just
Oh yeah,
wanting
for
to
sure.
know it's going to be okay is also important.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm. So besides the ATL, are you getting into stocks or NFTs, or doing any research outside of venue stuff?
Um, I mean, I've been in NFTs for close to 6 or 7 years on a hobby level.
Mm-hmm.
I bought my first coin in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
right after Bitcoin dropped from 1,200 to 600.
Oh, nice.
So that was me being very much so a speculator and thinking it'll go back up to 1,200, which it eventually did, and I've
Mm-hmm.
been kind of dollar cost averaging ever since then. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, it's not something I'm really looking too much into. It's just a part of my assets,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm very familiar with the technology, and I think it's a really great space. And I think that the regulation kind of needs to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember back in 2018, I believe, maybe late 2018, there was a huge rush of these ICOs, initial coin offerings, that were
Mm-hmm.
coming out and scamming people essentially out of a lot of money.
Oh,
Are you
damn.
familiar with
I
those
don't
ICOs?
remember
So an
that.
ICO is just, instead of an IPO, it's an initial coin offering.
Okay, I understand
So
that.
yeah, NFT. I mean, we yeah, we call it coins, I guess, or tokens, I guess, is the T part of
Mm-hmm.
NFT. um, but they were basically, um, by using the ICO name, they were kind of likening themselves to IPOs, which people like to think they can get rich off, just because it's kind of usually the base point of where a stock starts and goes up from there
Yeah.
usually. So this was rarely done with any regulatory backing,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they'd just be launched, and you have no basis of, okay, where is this coin being launched, who's overseeing it, and usually no one was. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a regulatory way of going about it, or a regulatory avenue where you can, essentially have a company which you then tokenize all the shares, and you offer those shares to the public. And when people buy the token or the coin, they're not just buying um, an NFT, really, because then I mean, maybe it's not fungible, but it's backed up by an actual share in a company, and you're an actual shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
So that, together with all the technological advancements that's happening in Ethereum
Mm-hmm.
specifically, and all the forks that are coming off of there, I would say once the regulators catch up, it'll be a lot better for investors and a lot better for companies. Just the
Mm-hmm.
cost, too, of settlement, of trading, the efficiency, and the amount of steps that are behind a stock transaction that happens now
Mm-hmm.
is just absolutely ridiculous, and that causes inefficiencies, and it causes people taking, everyone needs to get paid, and when you have that transaction, you have no less than probably 4 to 10 companies interacting somewhere in the background. If you make a trade through Robinhood, for example,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's a free trade, and yes, you only interact with Robinhood, but in the background, there's all these different, things happening, and people getting their pay somehow. And it usually ends up being pretty inefficient. So I'm all about NFTs and coins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people just need to, watch out what they're doing. Same with GameStop.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about what happened with GameStop.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely agree with the retail investor on that. But um, there's a lot of people who got hurt because they saw what happened to Bitcoin, and see it can increase 1,000 or 2,000 or 20,000 fold, but don't understand that a stock, GameStop, for example, cannot do that. It will be able to increase because of these short sellers, but not to that extent. And a lot of people got burned. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to go into that. And if I was the government, instead of me trying to regulate everyone, I would just be more so trying to educate people and saying it's okay if you go out and you want to invest in GameStop and lose all your money, or lose the money you invest, but maybe only invest 5 or 10% of your money. And I think that's more so about the education, because there's always going to be some new technology, just like what happened with ICOs, where the ICOs came out,
Mm-hmm.
and before the regulators could even say no, there were already billions of dollars invested, and a large chunk of that money probably lost. So if you can educate your it's the teach a man to fish situation, um, which I think should really apply here, but government is always notoriously slow to act. So
Yeah, I hear you. That's a very
hold my
good
breath
point you
there.
make. Just how important education is, and educating the public rather than just maybe regulating the public.
Yep.
And also for the people out there that don't know exactly what an NFT is, I've been on multiple Clubhouse, chats and like YouTube, like really trying to understand it recently because it's like really fascinating. But like it's really hard to find a really simple and basic explanation of what an NFT is. Like, can you explain it basically or
Well,
simply?
I mean, there's a few different levels you can go in terms of explanation. I think the first and most important explanation is that it is a means of transacting without a single central party. So it's I mean, that's the most simple, probably dictionary definition, but
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for people to kind of wrap their head around this because it's something that's abstract. The way you would explain this with people is that me and you transact. I agree to give you this, and you agree to give me something in exchange, and we pull some guy off the street, or specifically with Bitcoin, we pull 4 guys off the street, and they watch, us make this transaction.
Mm.
And that is what happens with Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's something that doesn't. Um, if you try to explain this to someone, if you try to really set something up that worked like this, people would
Yeah.
say you're crazy, because there's no way that this, how does this work? That it's completely nonsensical. What happens when you need to, figure out who's correct in this transaction? How do you find the guys again? It's just something
Mm-hmm.
that's completely nonsensical. So it's hard to explain that further without getting into a little bit more detail in terms of cryptography and how that all works. And I don't know how much time we have today, but that would be my first, level of explanation, and just kind of say you have to trust it. You have to trust the way it works. But if you'd like, I can get into the second level, or maybe we can save that for another time. I'm not sure.
No, I mean, I'm interested in blockchain, and I'm honestly like ready to just learn. And the last few weeks in particular, I've been like poking around YouTube every day. So
Okay.
is the next level, would you say, like entering like the blockchain like
Yeah.
formality?
So let me let me yeah. So let me go from the analogy that I used in terms of um, us transacting
Mm-hmm.
over something. So what happens is you have I'll use the same situation. I'm going to give you something. You're giving me something in return. And what happens is when we go out to make that transaction, we broadcast out the fact that we're making this transaction.
Okay.
And around the world, anyone who's in this network, in the Bitcoin network, let's say, can pick up this transaction and essentially verify the transaction. Now, there's something that's called, I'm going to sidebar here a little bit. It's important to understand. There's something called hashing. Are you familiar with that term?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So hashing is used when you need to store something safely without making it accessible later on. So this would be, for example, a password. When you create a password for pretty much any account. Let's say your Gmail account. You type in your password and you confirm it, and then you hit update. And Google takes your password and they run it through what's called a hash algorithm. And on the other side pops out this long string of usually about 256 characters that represent your input. Now, Google takes these 256 characters and they store that in their database. There's no way without brute force that they can figure out what your original input was. However, if you come back and you take the original input and you run it through the algorithm again, you'll get the exact same result. So next time you go to log into your Gmail account, you put in your password, they run it through, and they just compare it to your previous input, and they say, okay, you're the correct user. But if someone on the Google side went into their database, or their database gets hacked and everything gets released, everything everyone sees is just this string of 256 characters, and no one can figure out what the original password was.
Okay.
So the way that the whole mining, the reason I explained that is because the way that mining works is that it goes the other way around. So in our broadcast, in our transaction that we send out, everyone just sees the end result, and the mining happens by essentially brute forcing, by trying just a bunch of different combinations to figure out that end result. And whoever figures out that end result first is the person who receives the fraction of a Bitcoin or the Satoshi for figuring out that transaction. And the reason it's done like that is because there's no other way that we can use computers. You know, that's something so weird about digital media, is that you can make a copy of digital music as many times over as you want, and it costs you nothing except millions of a penny for the actual processing power to copy something. But the processing power to figure out, to reverse engineer and brute force this secret code is pretty intense, and that's why we use that method. But the cool thing is now, just like I told you, you can verify it one way around. When the one guy who figures out what the correct code is, which is randomized, everyone else in the network can verify that, and they can run it the other way through the algorithm and say, yes, that's correct. Your original input, that secret code that was generated, that is the correct code. Now the transaction has happened, and as soon as it's verified, that transaction enters the blockchain. Okay. Now, what's additionally very important is that transaction that has entered the blockchain, the previous transaction in the blockchain, is part of that secret code. So now that our transaction is in the blockchain, now there's a new secret code generated, and that's now the secret code that everyone has to essentially decipher. And the reason that that's important is because that's why it's called blockchain, is because every single transaction, be that a transaction between me and you or between people on the other side of the world, is all a part of this chain. And you can go up, you can go back and back and back and verify every single transaction all the way through the back, through the rest of the chain. Because what could happen is you could have, certain malicious people. Let's say we pull, 4 people off the street and they're all in cahoots, and they decide, hey, no, we're not gonna, we're gonna lie about what happened with this transaction. We're actually gonna say it went to one of us. Everyone else in the whole world can go out and verify what the correct chain of transactions is. And that's what makes it really unique, and it makes it decentralized, and it makes it so that you at home, you can verify what happened anywhere on the blockchain. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, okay. It's definitely very, very complicated still, but that makes it a lot more clear from what I've been researching. That is the best definition I've heard.
Yeah, I think it's just, there's a lot of things. For example, this hashing algorithm that you can put in something on one side and something else pops out on the other side that you can't reverse.
Yeah,
it's something that, at least to my knowledge about math, I remember in school doing algebra, you can solve on either side.
Oh yeah,
equation, right? Boom, and you can move stuff back and forth, and then you can do x equals this. So the fact that there's a mathematical formula that is only one directional, that's something I still don't understand, and how that works. And I think that that's something difficult for people to kind of wrap their head around. But then you got to remember, when you log in onto your online banking for your, regulated official, CoCentral or Wells Fargo, whatever, they use the exact same algorithm, not for their back end where all the transactions happen, but for when you log in, and every single website, um, uses this. So there's already that technology being used out there by big banks, just being employed in a very different way. But I think there are a few of these different steps that you have to, really understand. And I'm sure there's someone who could talk for hours and hours about cryptography and explain to you exactly why this works. Um, but most people, I think, unfortunately, are getting into NFTs and coins because of just the speculation aspect. I wouldn't say unfortunately. I would say any reason is a good reason to get into it, because then you have more people involved with it. But that you might just be, setting up yourself up for bad expectations. So I think I've initially got in for what I would say the wrong reason, speculation. But then once I started to understand the technology, it's really, can really blow you away.
Yeah, you have like 6-7 years since you first got into it in
Exactly.
2014, so you've learned a
But
lot.
I mean, I've been learning probably for the last like 4 years about it and really getting into it. Specifically about kind of I've been working with a few regulators about being able to integrate coins with real public offerings or shares. And there's a lot of cool things that can happen there as well. There's something called a smart contract, and that's something on the Ethereum side. So Ethereum is basically just more smart Bitcoin. And what you can do with that, for example, is when in your company, I don't know if you followed Brio, what they did with their public offering. So they did something called a DPO, a direct public offering. And the unique thing about that is it's just very, very cheap to do. It's something that can only happen within state borders. It's a California corporation offering shares to only Californians. So it's a cheap regulatory option. And they went out and they raised $600,000 from the local community here. And it worked out really well. But now you have, I invested as well. I have a paper certificate that they sent to me. And now when I want to transact this, it's I mean, it's cool to have, but it's impossible to transact. I don't know if we want to set up a meeting once a week where every Brio shareholder goes down to the plaza and we decide, what the share price is and we can transact. It's, completely impossible to do. And there's also no accountability. When Brio went out and they raised their $600,000, because of the cost to do it, they have to raise all the money and they promise people, okay, we're going to buy a new oven. We're going to make it an upstairs. We're going to do all these, these different things. And you kind of just have to trust them. But what you can do with smart contracts is we can invest our $600,000 as a community into Brio, but only 100,000 of those dollars are actually going to be available to Brio. And the other 500,000 are essentially locked up. And only once Brio has convinced the investors that they can access another tranche of their money, do they actually get that money. So the money's already there, the money's already invested, but the company's continuously accountable to the shareholders. So they do like 100,000 and then they say, okay, we bought a new oven, efficiency has increased here, or whatever the guidelines are. And then the shareholders come back to vote and they say, instead of having to go down to the square and vote, or wherever you want to do that, they can just vote off their phone and say, okay, yes or no,
So it's like building trust after that first 100,000. And
exactly.
It's like, okay, we'll unlock another 100,000. And
exactly.
Then, okay.
Exactly. And at the same time, the trust all the way around is that the investors have already put their money in, they've already committed. So it really works both ways. And I think there's a kind of an uphill battle there, because a lot of trust has also been lost in terms of all this, the hacks that happened early on when Bitcoin was getting big, in terms of, just coins disappearing and people stealing stuff. Which fortunately I really haven't heard of any, big hacks happening recently. And I'm optimistic that things have been, tightened up to a point where people can get more trust. But that's, it goes both ways, and it's a lot easier to erode trust than to build it.
Is there room in the future for banks and for crypto? I mean, I know some people think that crypto will decentralize, like cut away banks, but will there, do you think, be room for both?
That is a really, really good question. I think in 100 years from now, no. But I think over the course of the next, maybe 50, 50 years,
Yeah.
definitely. And I
Hmm.
think that's because banks used to be, when things were done with cash and with maybe even physical gold. Imagine the gold rush, in California, you find a huge nugget and you need somewhere to store it, and someone who's trustworthy.
Yeah.
That doesn't really apply nowadays too much. Banks, the last thing they're really doing is, I mean, yes, it's that's the reason bank buildings are so big. The bank here in Arcata, the Wells Fargo, I mean, it has like 20-foot ceilings, and it's
Hmm.
it's a cornerstone here in our Arcata. It's because it's supposed to convey that trust. But really, banks nowadays, opening up a checking account is usually free, and the services, what they want when you go inside and you look at the billboards or the ads they have, they're not about their banking services. They're about a student loan or a car loan or a mortgage or what have you. Um,
Hmm.
and those are services that banks can still continue to provide, even, or may still have to provide, even with blockchain still existing. And the cool thing is that banks can operate like in the background. A bank has a huge, very antiquated software, usually called a core banking system, um, that could run on Bitcoin itself, or not on Bitcoin, but run on blockchain technology itself, um, to verify transactions. And you could verify transactions with different banks and run this all back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing is just you as NFTs and blockchain becomes a more robust technology, you're still going to want to have a trusted party. And that trusted party could be the bank. They can still provide that trust, and then they can still provide a lot of these services. And why I say they won't exist in 100 years is because all these services, just like um, you can transact now without a bank, lending, and all of those things will eventually, and lending, insurance, um, mortgages, all these things will eventually happen, I believe, without banks. I mean, there's a lot of companies like Lending Club and Prosper.
Hmm.
Um, Prosper, I believe it's called, are two websites where you can lend money directly to other people. Uh,
Oh.
and so someone goes on there, they get their credit verified, they say, I want $30,000, they give their reason, and then you go out and you buy at 1% of this loan. So instead of you lending someone 30,000, you lend someone $300,
Oh, how cool.
and you split this up across a bunch of different loans. And it's cool because you can, if you want to, you can just set it on auto. But if you
Hmm.
want, you can also go out and pick each individual loan. And usually, sometimes they write like a story. Someone wants to go on vacation or wants to renovate this, so they write their thing. So it's kind of a little personal thing too. But then they also have their credit score, right next to their name,
Hmm.
and then their interest rate, and you divvy up risk that way. So in the
And so you could be
future, I think
receiving interest basically on lending money.
exactly. So Lending Club and Prosper, I think, are two. I forget if it's called Prosper, but those two
It's
websites.
like crowd lending.
Exactly,
That's
exactly.
fascinating.
It's pretty interesting stuff.
God, this stuff is
Um,
so interesting to me. I really enjoy just learning about the different ways I think the future is going to operate. I think NFTs, crypto, these things are just going to be more and more
yeah,
prevalent.
absolutely. And I don't think there's anything. I think obviously, people who own and operate banks are maybe worried about the future, but you got to remember, a bank is there. A bank doesn't really have its own money. A bank has other people's money that they lend out. When they lend you money, they're usually lending out deposits that they have from
Hmm.
sometimes very wealthy people, but they're really just a middleman there. There's nothing, like these banks can't. It doesn't mean these banks can't transition into becoming like a Lending Club or Prosper website, or a copy of those systems that operate on blockchain. And then instead of them being a bank, they're just a really big transactor. And the people that bring the bank money to invest, they can just go directly to the blockchain. So it's
Totally.
really, it's the same as worrying about, um, back in the Industrial Revolution, worrying about, oh, all the farmers are going to be out of a job, because now we go from 70% of our population being in agriculture to 3%. Same as saying, okay, we have 4% of our population in banking, and it'll go down to 1%.
Yeah,
And
good
those
point.
other 3% are going to be able to, you know, uh, work on blockchain in a different form. I think it's just a natural evolution of things.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there is, if banks, as long as they don't stand their ground too hard and are open to change, I think they have the opportunity to be around for a long time.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Hey, I think there are some people that are worried that they'll be going away, or there's not place for them in the
Right.
future. But you make
I
a
think
good
that's a
point. There's
really
place.
that's a really good question, because something that I have to talk, when I talk to certain banks that I talked about blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that, everyone from the CEO down to the teller is worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're being attacked from all angles with technology like the ATMs that are getting better and better.
That's
The
right.
tellers are going to, be eliminated. The CEOs that are working with antiquated technology and antiquated backend are being eliminated. The bankers who are, processing loans are also getting eliminated, just because the loan processing software is getting so good. There's no more. They don't assess anything. Bankers are just glorified data entry people. There's no, um, at least in kind of public banking, not in like the high net worth private banking sector, but in public banking, the guy that's sitting there at the desk, he's not really doing anything except clicking buttons on a computer and entering what you said into the screen. And when the loan gets approved or denied, it's never his decision. It's the decision of usually the software.
So
That's
is you
running.
saying that could be like taken over by a computer someday, like that job?
I mean, it already has been, completely.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more. Very rarely do you have an underwriter actually approving a loan. When you apply for a credit card nowadays, you go online, you punch in your information. Usually, if you get approved within 30 seconds, you have your approval. If you
Mm-hmm.
get denied, usually they, try to make it sound nice and say, "Oh, you'll get your letter in the mail." But your decision happens within 30 seconds. The
Mm-hmm.
same with the guy sitting at the desk. He's not doing anything. I mean, maybe someone can enlighten me about what they actually are doing, but they're pretty much they go on their website and they just punch in your information that you
Punch in
give
the
them in
numbers.
person,
Mm-hmm.
and the same stuff happens.
Dang, man. I think in 30 to 50 years, it's going to be quite the world that we're going to be living in. We'll be at the last quarter of our life enjoying the flying cars and the computers rolling around with us.
Yeah, that's the one thing I really want to, I really always want to be on the kind of bleeding edge with technology. I know
Mm-hmm.
my, grandparents and even my parents aren't always, about the newest thing, but that's just one thing I want to kind of commit. Even when I'm 70, I want to be riding in a flying car.
You've always been
Even if
into innovation, huh?
I have been, but I think that's also, being young, it's easy to say that. So I just
Mm-hmm.
want to commit to that throughout the rest of my life, because I really enjoy, the new thing. I'm always, for better or for worse, trying to, buy the newest gadget or engaging in whatever the
Mm-hmm.
newest tech trend is. But
Well,
I
I
mean,
think
it's a double-edged sword.
you're an education seeker, and so am I. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you taking the time to educate us on the crypto world and
absolutely.
just the world of the future in terms of new technologies, because that's a thing. What we talked about in the last 10, 15 minutes, I think, is very sought after information. A lot of people right now. I've been on different platforms just searching, and Clubhouse. There's so many different rooms I've been seeing talking about
Yeah,
these exact things. People trying to make money, and then people trying to create hubs and networks of
right.
earners, and like create all these like networks of people trying to like sell crypto together and learn how to sell it together. And maybe that's just because my interest and what I'm seeing. But have you been on Clubhouse at all?
No, I'm actually not familiar with it.
No, it's
Tell
a
me
cool
about that.
app. Yeah, I'll maybe talk to you a little about that off
Okay.
camera. But yeah, there's a lot of information out there that I've been loving and learning about. And thank you for taking the time talking about
Yeah,
that stuff
absolutely.
today, and a little about the Arcata life, the venue life. The world will open
Yeah,
soon, and I'll be seeing you at the ATL soon.
absolutely.
I'm hoping that. I'm optimistic also. So
Yeah, well, let's give it a few weeks.
how can people find out about the Arcata Theater Lounge? What's your Instagram or
Yeah, easiest way is Instagram. It's at Arcata Theater, and that's with a R-E at the end. A theater spelled with an R-E, because we're fancy like that.
That's right. We're fancy over there. Sweet. Arcata Theater on Instagram. Check them out. And you can keep up to date on when the events will happen.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Well,
I
sweet.
appreciate the opportunity as well.
Thanks, bro. Well, I'll be talking to you soon, man. Have a great day.
Likewise.
Yeah. Peace out, brother.